Welcome friends of the Hannon Library and members of the public who are here physically in attendance, as well as those who are Zooming. This is a continuing of our speaker series, but it is also our annual membership meeting. So those of you who are members, as well as the public, please prepare to stay an extra few minutes at the end of the speaker session so that we can elect our new board members and 2 new officers. Meanwhile, we generally begin our events here at SOU with a reading of what we call the land acknowledgement, which is a statement that acknowledges the presence of Native American peoples in Southern Oregon. The Friends of the Hannon Library take this moment to acknowledge that Southern Oregon University is located within the ancestral homelands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Lagawa peoples who lived here since time immemorial. These tribes were dispersed during the rapid Euro-American colonization and the gold rush, an armed conflict between 1851 and 1856. In the 1850s, discovery of gold and settlement brought thousands of Euro-Americans to their lands, leading to warfare, epidemics, starvation, and villages being burned. In 1853, the first of several treaties were signed, confederating these tribes and others together, who would then be referred to as the Rogue River Tribe. These treaties ceded most of their homelands to the United States, and in return, they were guaranteed a permanent homeland reserved for them. At the end of the Rogue River Wars in 1856, these tribes and many other tribes from Western Oregon were removed to the Siletz Reservation and the Grand Ronde Reservation. Today, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians are the living descendants of the Takelma, Shasta, and Lagawa peoples of this area. The Friends of the Hannon Library encourage you to learn about the land you reside in and join us in advocating the inherent sovereignty of Indigenous people. Incidentally, at the far end of the library on the ground floor, there's a beautiful series of wooden sculptures that were completed a few years ago. If you get a chance, take them out. They were from these particular people, and we now house that artwork. As president of the Friends of the Hannon Library, my name is Roy Scarborough, by the way, I want to invite you to become a member of the Friends of the Hannon Library. The brochures are over there at the table, and on your way out, you can pick one of those up. And there's a few perks to becoming a Friends of the Library, in addition to this wonderful fellowship. Now, with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our fellow board member and vice president nominee, Ed Abacela, and he will introduce our featured speaker.
That's right. So vice president nominee, that's what happens when you miss a meeting. So it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Greg Jones. He's a world-renowned atmospheric scientist and wine climatologist. He's held research and teaching positions at the University of Virginia, Linfield University, and SOU. And for over 25 years, his research has linked weather and climate with wine vine growth, fruit chemistry, wine chemistry in regions all around the globe. He was one of the first to tie the fundamental biological phenomena in vines to influences in productivity and quality. It's really groundbreaking work, and he was named to Decanter Magazine's list of 50 most influential people in the world of wine, Oregon Wine Press's 2009 Wine Person of the Year, and the top 50 wine industry leaders by Wine Business Monthly. He also has a special connection to the Hannon Library. He was a consultant in the first phase of the Wine of Southern Oregon project in the Southern Oregon Digital Archives. And in the back of the room, There's some material from the archives, and the archivist, Jan Giuliani, is back there to show you some of the things. One of them is a picture of a younger Greg Jones, when he was named Oregon Wine Press 2009 Person of the Year. So you can go back and take a look at that. He was also an advocate for the Sarah Powell Wine Collection Fund started by the Rogue Valley Wine Growers Association, and was instrumental in getting some of the wine materials into the Hannon Library. So with no further ado, Greg Jones.
Well, thank you very much. How do I know they're hearing me? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Good, okay. All right. While you were sitting there and we were trying to get ready, we played some digital gymnastics here today. I've worked here from 1997 to 2017, and every time I came in this room, it was always something. So nothing's changed. Nothing's changed, right? So I really appreciate you guys readying things for me, just to be like normal. And it worked out really well.
Made you feel at home.
Yeah. I also want to thank, I'm trying to move some stuff around so I can see a little bit better here. But I also just want to thank everybody for being here. I have a lot of fond memories being in the Rogue Valley, doing research for the Oregon wine industry, but also being here at SOU in times of lots of changes through the years with SOU. But I do want to recognize one person in the room here who was, I look back on the date, on April 7th, 1997, I sat in a conference room with him in an interview for the job here. John Mears. It's amazing it's been this long, right? Yeah, but it was back in early April of 1997. I remember telling my wife Liz, who's sitting here, that this would be a good job. And I came out and it was beautiful weather. And we had a couple of days of interviews, and I remember that very well. So anyway, I just wanted to recognize you. But I don't know if you were the one who pulled the strings and said, hire this guy or not, but.
That's another story I'll tell you later.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So a couple of things before I get started on this. Number one, I always try to talk about this subject in a way in which it really is hopefully bringing awareness to your lives in general. But some of this happens to be a little bit depressing in some ways, because it's about something that's really big that we really have a hard time getting a hold of in terms of understanding it. I also want to acknowledge the fact that all of you are probably thinking it's just been one of the coldest springs and winters we've had in a long time. And everything I'm going to talk about, it doesn't mean anything. And I've heard this quite a bit. I travel around the world giving talks on climate change. And if it's just been the hottest day of the year, the hottest month of the year, or the hottest season, I'm brilliant. But if it's just been a cold day or a snowy week or something like that, I'm kind of an idiot then. So, it goes both ways a little bit, but I just wanted you guys to recognize that just a little bit. So with that, I'm going to go through my slides. I've got a little bit of general things and some data for those people that like data. And I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to give you my conclusions first, and then come back and kind of rehash them at the end of this. So the very first component of this is that warming in the future is highly, highly likely. Persistence in the climate system and just the way things work mean that we're pretty much, we're locked into some amount of warming in the future. So this is pretty clear. Economics, and I would argue greed, is driving some of the slow influences that we have in our responses to climate change. We can talk about that later if you want. That's a whole nother story. Agriculture is both part of the problem and part of the solution. Lots of things that can be done within the agricultural sector. That's only one small piece of society. We need to remember that. Mitigation in agriculture is absolutely necessary. I think we're already doing some of this to large degrees, but adaptive potential is also there. And there's a lot of that's been going on for quite a long time by producers all over the world. I am going to argue here in a little bit, when we talk about it a little bit, I don't think we're using the diversity of the crop that we have to work with. And there's some really important pieces of kind of that spectrum of wine production. I think we need to build resiliency into our agricultural systems, whether it's a broadacre crop like corn or wheat, or a specialty crop like avocados or pineapples or whatever. But we need to be more resilient within those systems, and it's not easy. There are no silver bullets. There will not be one thing that we can all do to change everything and make it all better. It's a portfolio of responses that we all have to think about relative to what our role in the overall framework of all this is. So I guess if that's enough, then we can all go home. Well, let me kind of go through the rest of this here. So big picture issues. Human influence on climate is big, but it doesn't happen from just one thing. It's a sum total of everything that we do. And that's a real challenge for us to really, get a hold of. But the idea is that it definitely is the whole greenhouse gas emissions component of things. It's all the carbon that we put into the atmosphere and how it changes our energy balance. Absolutely. And we tend to talk about the most because it's something that we think that we can act on a little bit easier. But it's also urbanization, how we build cities. It's also deforestation, how we change the landscape from a vegetative standpoint. Desertification, how we take fragile kind of arid or semi-arid areas and force them into becoming more desertified over time. And then lastly, one we hardly talk about at all, which is probably one of the biggest ones, is ocean acidification, how we're changing the chemistry of the ocean and how that will influence biogeochemical engineering and feedback loops into the system. So while we talk a lot about fossil fuels, realize that it's a sum total of all of these things. And that's why it's so hard for us to kind of grab hold of, small things that we can all do to really make a difference. And when we talk about the wine industry, I've been around the wine sector now for over 30 years, and there are a lot of change factors that are going on out there. And some of them I think you guys will recognize, and some of them maybe not. Number one, there's lots of economics going on, both at the national and international scale. I don't know if how many of you have heard, but about 5 years ago, China completely cut off Australia's exports of wine to their country. That took away half of the export potential for the entire country of Australia. Not only did it ruin their wine sector economy, but it caused them to move wine to other places in the world, which challenged how we bought and sold wines elsewhere. Big issues. There's also growing demand, but there's very significant changing demographics in there. I can look at the vast majority of people in here, and you're the people that have been buying my family's wine, maybe not directly, but indirectly for a long time. You guys over there might not be. You have some other things going on. You have interest in different beverages. It's really a big issue. The idea that there's more choice today and how people are approaching that set of choices from a younger demographic. It's very prominent. My own sons are doing the same thing, and my nieces and nephews are all doing the same thing. So from a wine sector business standpoint, we have to address that and figure out how do we make a product that's going to entice you to stay with us. Okay, got ideas? Come talk to me later. New markets, new consumers, new styles of wine. This is a lot of things going on here. We could unpack this and talk for the next hour, but just realize that as a wine producer, we look at this and think about, okay, how can we get into a new market or a new segment of the market? How can we produce a style that's not out there yet that can be very prominent and be very interesting to the consumer? So those things are all really big for us to consider. There's also purchasing trends that are happening now that are very different. Of course, we could talk about, bag in a box kind of purchasing trends, but we can also talk about vending machines, single serve objects, cans, now lightweight bottles and PET, all kinds of other things happening. And this will only continue. It's going to change very rapidly in the next 10 years. Historically, my industry, the wine industry, depended upon wine writers to write about our wines and say, oh, they loved it, and give all the flowery things that they might say about it. Well, their tastes have changed, and how they write about wine has changed. And the whole journalistic framework behind wine writing has changed. So there's a tremendous number of things there that are really hard for us to really, as a sector, to make sure that we're getting the right information out to the public. But it's a big piece of the puzzle. And then lastly, I don't know if you've thought about this, but the movement of bulk wine is as big as I've ever seen it. I gave a talk in Europe a couple of years ago before the pandemic at a bulk wine conference. And I went into probably the largest conference I've ever been to, thousands upon thousands of people there. And what were they doing? They were buying bulk wine. They would go up to a counter and they would taste individual wines from Argentina. And then they would take their scorecard and they'd go through and they'd say, I want X amount of gallons of A, C, and B, and put it together. And they would ship it to them in a bladder. And that's how wine gets anywhere today. And so it's just an amazing difference about what happens. It's very, I think it's a good way for us to kind of make some changes that are happening out there, but it's also a challenge when you're producing wine in this region and another country dumps thousands of gallons into your economy. So it's a big challenge. So lots of different change factors there. So now let's get into this whole framework of weather, climate, and wine. If you look at history, wine regions developed whenever the weather or the climate was conducive to do so. Here in this region, when we really developed this industry, it was because the climate was suitable for us to grow the things that people were interested in growing. So we know that that's clearly the case. We know it's the case everywhere around the world where wine is developed as an industry. But the weather and climate of these regions all vary, quite differently. Some are at the climatic margin, meaning they're at the warm end of the spectrum or the cool end of the spectrum and are really pushing those limits. Some have warmer days, really hot, high maximum temperatures, while others have warmer nights where they have higher humidity in the air and nighttime temperatures are elevated. Some are drier, some are wetter. The old adage that all wine regions are the same, it really doesn't hold true if you look at it hard enough. Some have reliable growing season rainfall, therefore they say they don't need to irrigate, and others have none, so they have to irrigate. And we're kind of more in that second piece of it. Some are more prone to risk from weather extremes, hail, frost, freezes, floods, any number of things, while others are much more equitable and consistent. So is there something that we can identify from a weather and climate perspective in terms of what the most suitable place to grow grapes in the world is? And I can tell you, after working on this for 30 years, I found it. It's right here. I don't know, Liz, do you remember this?
I do.
I was getting ready to give a talk one time back probably in early, like 2012, something like that. And one of my sons was in a class at the high school and he had a Photoshop project to do. And he started talking about it, where they grew grapes, and we decided to do this. So this was his Photoshop image that he made. So anyway, I just kind of use it because it's kind of fun. But they don't grow grapes there.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different risks and challenges that happen relative to any agribusiness, but viticulture, of course, very specifically. We have individual weather events that are very localized and have a tendency to be short-term. We have climate variability, which kind of operates on the seasonal to decadal kind of framework and tends to be regionalized depending on where you live. Then we also have the climate structure. If you go to move somewhere, you often think about what's the weather and climate like? What's that structure like, so I can think about what I want to do? Well, the same thing comes about by growing a crop too. This tends to be long-term and very kind of regional to global at scale. So these drive crop risk, production and quality variability, and overall suitability. And so over the years, as I've done this research looking at this industry, I've tried to help identify what are those risk factors, how can you best avoid them or manage them, how do you understand how variability plays a role in your economics of your operations, and then the bigger one is suitability. Why might you plant a given variety in a given place? It needs to be suitable to be able to be economically viable. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of a systems kind of look at this right here. So if you were to take from harvest in one vintage, going across the winter into bud break in the spring, to flowering veraison, which is a point at which the grapes change color back to harvest in the next vintage. This is a pretty complex system. I just want to give you a sense of what we in the industry really look at in terms of what's important for us. First of all, when we end a given season and the vines are getting ready to go into dormancy, we want it to happen slowly. We don't want it to be a boom, hard frost, freeze in the fall. We want the vines to be able to harden off a little bit, have a little bit of chilling in the winter. We want it to get just cold enough to help that vine system function better in the spring, but we don't want it to get too cold. So we have to really be concerned about that. But that's a really important thing we don't think about very much relative to many crop systems. In the springtime, we would love to see soil temperatures and air temperatures all kind of coming together at once, and day length changes helping to cue the plants to do what they do. We have so many plants in nature that tend to show day length kind of responses to climate, some due to temperature, some due to soil temperature. So there's some quite a big differences between those, but we'd like that to all happen in a world where you have kind of low risk from frost. When we get in toward the flowering period, grapevines are not the most prettiest flowering plant in the world. You could drive by a vineyard, you could barely tell it's flowering. But when they're flowering, what's really important for them is that high solar potential, meaning clear skies, no rain, no clouds, that kind of thing. It really helps flowering and the fruit set component. So having that kind of optimum kind of framework is really important. So if you're in an area that gets a lot of rain in the spring, about June, when vines are flowering, you've got some problems because you're just not going to have good fruit set. When you get into the middle of the growing season, optimum, you really need to have the right kind of heat going through the middle of the season to help ripen the fruit. But you also want to do it in a situation in which you have low variability, meaning you don't want to have swings between a week of 100 degrees and the next week of 70. The vines just don't do very well with that. They would much rather see 80 for weeks on end during the middle of the growing season. So low heat stress, low variability is really important. And then when you get back over toward the harvest window, what we're looking for is we're looking really for the daytime temperatures to still be a little elevated, but nighttime temperatures to start getting cold. And you guys all notice that when we get into fall around here, nighttime temperatures are crisp and lovely. The vines do so well in that kind of environment. So the more that we can have that kind of diurnal temperature range that fits that, the better off we can really ripen really high quality fruit. But we also want to do it when the season's starting to truncate. If you're growing grapes in a really warm place in the world, you're likely ripening and harvesting when it's still summer. And that's just not good for quality. The last thing, of course, is we'd like to do it in a place where there's very little rainfall. That's why most people grow grapes down here instead of up in the Willamette Valley, because they get rain up there during that period of time. So this diagram right here, I may have shown this, some of you may have seen this out there, but this actually started when my father and my father started asking me questions about this whole agricultural sector in the late 80s, early 90s. And we started thinking about kind of, okay, what does it look like? Can we understand kind of where and how grapes are grown? And I came back from a visit that we had. We came to this region looking for a place to grow grapes. And I was sitting in a bar having a beer in the O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And I kind of drew this on the back of a napkin. I wish I had that napkin still. That was one of those things. You guys know, being a scientist, you're thinking about something, you're writing something down, and you know, you having that piece of paper is something. So anyway, this is what I was trying to do. I was trying to say, what does this industry know about some aspect of climate versus some aspect of how we could talk about quality, price or ratings or some other metric that's out there? And if you look at it, it's pretty straightforward. It's almost always parabolic for any agricultural crop that you're working with. A climate metric, especially temperature, is going to drive a given response to some kind of quality factor. And so what became my interest over most of my research career was really looking at, could we identify what was too cold, where the fruit wouldn't ripen to necessarily high enough standards, may have way too much acid, unripe flavors, and be unbalanced. Versus what was happening on the other end of the spectrum, where it was too warm. When it's too warm, you tend to get overripe fruit. You have a tendency to have lower retention of acid, and it tends to be unbalanced. We know somewhere in these zones between those two red bars that there's an optimum condition that's going to be, from time to time, you might have a little rain or hail or something that could change some of that. But ideally, you would want to be within those optimum thresholds. So for me, this became my kind of focus, trying to understand what that was. And especially when I started looking at climate change impacts on this, because those thresholds have changed a little bit over time. And there's some really important issues there that I think are related to how we manage our vines. Can we create a little plasticity in how they operate within that environment? Or how does the variety over the long term have its own kind of internal adaptation kind of process? One might move a little faster than the other, or they might be going in opposite directions. But it's a real kind of challenge. That also led me to creating this diagram. I only did this for these varieties because they were some of the most well-known and planted varieties in the world. Well, I collected data from hundreds and hundreds of places that were growing the varieties you see here. And it was all based upon very simple measures of temperature, trying to take a growing season framework and saying, if we know enough about temperature here, what can we learn about these thresholds? So each one of these bars are essentially the threshold that talks about optimum quality and production for that variety. If you look across this range of temperatures, you can take any one of these varieties and talk about what you might get from it, depending on where you might be growing it. So I'm just going to use Tempranillo. My family grows quite a bit of it. If you're growing Tempranillo at the lower, what I call intermediate kind of climate edge for Tempranillo, you're going to get a lighter bodied wine, lower alcohol, higher acidity, and a little brighter fruit characteristics. It's just a given. The winemaker didn't do that. The growing season or the growing region did that. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, you're just simply going to get a fuller body, darker, deeper color, flavors, and also likely higher alcohol. Again, the winemaker didn't do that. The climate did that. Okay, so you can see kind of the basic framework for that for any variety. Now we can also say that we can grow Tempranillo or any variety outside the bounds that you see on this diagram here. But the problem is that it typically is not going to be stylistically appropriate. It may not be economically viable from a productivity standpoint. It often ends up either overripe or underripe, and it ends up in bulk markets. I mean, that's how, believe it or not, winemakers worldwide get rid of wine, is they put it out on a bulk market. Okay, and it has typically something that's not grown in its most ideal location. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Pinot Noir here, just because it's kind of Oregon's marquee variety, but also it gives a good example of kind of what this framework can tell us a little bit about. I call these bars here more or less the climate niche for each one of those varieties, the climate niche in terms of temperature. So if you look at Pinot Noir, if you took a basic 7-month growing season, 214 days, and you average temperature up over the course of the season, Pinot Noir has about a 4-degree Fahrenheit climate niche. 4-degree Fahrenheit climate niche, meaning that you can't go too far out of those bounds and have it produce reliably high quality fruit. Okay, so just remember the number 4 degrees. It'll be really important here in a little bit. I'm going to give you a little bit another example of this. I think is really important. So the vertical line here for Burgundy is its long-term 75-year climate average, and the horizontal bar there with the 2 arrows is the 1.5 standard deviations of that climate. So when Burgundy is cool, you can see it's on the cooler end of the spectrum. So you could expect the wine style from those vintages to be very different than a warmer year when it's on the other end of that spectrum. And that's what happens in Burgundy. This doesn't mean that one's not good or one's better than the other. They're just different. Okay, so that's kind of the idea behind it. So now let's kind of go, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot this last piece here. I just wanted to also give this idea that there are bookends that you can put on it. Some of the best cool climate Pinot Noirs today in the world are coming out of the Tamar Valley in Tasmania. It's one of the really the top-notch regions today. And some of the warmest places are down in California that are doing good Pinot Noir. The Russian River, Santa Rita Hills, and some other places like that. That just gives you an idea what those bookends might look like. So then that gets us to just putting this into perspective. If we're talking about climate's warming and grapevines are all kind of experiencing this and we're trying to manage that system, how does it really affect grape and wine chemistry? So the basics are this. Warmer climates accelerate sugar ripening, and sugar is what produces the alcohol within wine grape production. So if you're ripening your fruit in a warmer environment, you're going to get more sugars, which raises the alcohol content. And if you look at all of the data out there from the 1970s to today, alcohol pretty much worldwide is about 2 degrees higher than it was back then. May not sound like a lot, but when you look at it's quite a bit in terms of the overall alcohol production component. So as sugars are ripening really fast within the system in a warmer climate, acid gets lost. Acid gets metabolized within the system. And acid is really important because when we go buy a wine, we don't often buy it because it's a big alcoholic fruit bomb. We buy it because it's zesty and zingy and goes with the food we're eating. And so acid is what does that. So you want to preserve acid. If you're growing fruit in a warmer environment, you don't get as much acid. You're going to lose it. You may have to add it artificially back, which people do. And then lastly, there's some secondary compounds. There's actually quite a few of them, but the 2 main ones are color, anthocyanins, basically break down under heat. So if you're growing grapes in a warmer environment, color is less stable. So color of the wine is less stable. And then the other one are tannins. They're how you make your mouth pucker a little bit, but it's really important for mouthfeel in wines. As we ripen fruit quicker, tannins don't develop quite at the same kind of rate, so to speak, as some of the other compounds. So that's some of the basics of the general chemistry. And then that takes me back to this diagram. Questions?
What is the degree of alcohol?
Going from like 14 to 15 degree alcohol. Like if you,
Percent.
well, it's a percentage. It's a percent of volume over volume. Is what it
Okay,
is.
so the degree is the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So going back to this diagram and trying to put this in perspective, let's just say you're growing, and I've just chosen 3 here, Pinot Noir, Malbec, or Cabernet Sauvignon. And climate warms, can you ripen that fruit anywhere out in that spectrum? Given what we know today about this industry, we don't know much of that whatsoever. We don't encounter those conditions enough to know what kind of adaptive responses we have to do, or what kind of other things we have to do to the system to be able to ripen fruit that is economically viable. We just don't know that. So the question is that what would you need to do to be able to do that if you had to? You know, you got the plant system you have to work with. You got to farm your land and think about what that might look like. And you got to think about the production system and what do you do to be able to ripen Malbec in a really hot climate? And it's a big question. So this gets into this whole idea about the number of varieties out there. I don't know how many of you have heard some of this, but there's roughly 16,000 Vita spinifera names for wines that are out there. Many of them are synonyms. If you go to Portugal and you go to Spain, same variety has 2 different names, or often 4 different names, just from different places it's grown. So, but when you break it down, we roughly think we have about 5,000 unique varieties in the world, but we know so little about them. I mean, if you're a farmer, wouldn't you want to know if you had something else in your toolbox that you could play with and do something with? It's a big issue. So that takes me to the whole diversity component of this. So if there's 5,000 unique vinifera varieties, how much do we actually do much with in terms of production? Jancis Robinson in a big compendium called Wine Grape. I think you have it here in the library. I remember bringing it in years ago. She identified 1,368 commercially what she called prime varieties, or those that have more than a couple of acres being planted and grown worldwide. I also worked with Kim Anderson and Signe Nelson on the book that they put together looking at wine grape varieties worldwide. And here I think what we identified in some of the problems with this. Currently, right now, 50% of the planted acreage worldwide is done with 16 varieties. And if you break it down even further, 17% is done with 3. So the question I've always had with this, if you just think about this real quick, is it the consumer that told the industry to do that? Or is it the industry that started doing that so the consumer would buy the types of wines with names they could pronounce? It's a big issue. Europeans know that the number one reason that people don't buy certain wines is because there's a name they can't pronounce. It's a really interesting puzzle. If you go to the New World wine regions outside of Europe, we have 7 varieties that make up 50% of the plantings. So we know nothing. That sounded like Hogan's Heroes. Remember Schultz? We know nothing. John, you remember that show, right? Yeah. So and now I'm going to get a little bit more into probably some data components of this and talk about it. Let me go back to this and tell you what I've been seeing out there in the world, either in my research or colleagues' research. Number one, winters are warmer. Don't take this winter for what it's worth. It's an absolute abnormality. And this winter wouldn't have been as cold here if it wasn't 60 degrees warmer in the Siberian Arctic somewhere else. There's always a give and take in that kind of framework of things. Dormant periods have been warmer. We don't have as much chilling and cold hardiness going on, but winter freezes do not go away. They just become more problematic, I think. During the spring, we know from our limited soil temperature data that soil temperatures have gone up. As long as moisture levels are about the same, but atmospheric temperatures and soil temperatures have gone up most everywhere. So growth is earlier in the season. And again, don't think about this spring, think about the last 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 springs and what's happened here in this region. But frost still occurs. We have some evidence of rainfall and cloud cover shifts in some regions that affects flowering, but it's not ubiquitous. It's not everywhere. During the growing season, the heart of the growing season, we know we have more heat accumulation in general overall, but we've also registered pretty much in every wine region in the world, more variability in temperature from day to day and week to week. And of course, heat stress is a big component of that. Getting down toward the harvest, remember I said earlier that having a high diurnal temperature range where you have warm days and cool nights is really good. What's happened in most places worldwide is that the diurnal temperature range has gotten shorter, not shorter. The differential has been less. And the reason is that a warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. And if you hold more moisture in the atmosphere, nighttime temperatures can't drop as low as they used to. Okay, so that's kind of the real big take home with it. And even though here it's not as noticeable as it might be in somewhere else, the data clearly shows it. And it's only going to get even greater over time. And then we talked about this whole idea about fruit ripening early, and you have all these ripeness clocks that are kind of out of sync. And I think that's a big piece of what's going on. The plants have actually told us that there's things going on as well. So when you talk about phenology, matter of fact, I remember giving a talk on phenology in this room quite a long time ago, and somebody asked me about it. Are you talking about phrenology or phenology? You know what phrenology is, right? The study of the bumps on your head. I didn't get a PhD in that. No, but vine growth is very. People have observed vine growth all over the world for wine grapes, and there's really good records. The vines are telling us it's happening. 4 to 8 days per degree Fahrenheit, depending on if it's early in the season or late in the season. So we clearly have that kind of going on. We also have seen a little bit of what's called compressed phases, meaning from veraison to harvest or bud break to flowering, the window of time it used to go through it has gotten shorter. So the plant's accelerating its growth cycle. And that's a response to what it's seeing in its own environment. We are trying to do all kinds of things to trick that plant system. That's what farmers do, right? Try to trick it. I can't talk about all these because we'll be here forever, but just to know that there are issues happening in the soil system. There are issues happening with CO2 fertilization from the atmosphere, water availability issues, of course, just about everywhere. And then disease, pests. There's some big things coming, I think, and we got to be pretty concerned about them. Sue, remember we were talking about that one insect? Yeah. We can talk about that later if you want. But let me get into some general information. You know, I put this up here just because I'm an organizational member of the World Meteorological Organization, and I really respect everything they do. And a lot of what we see in the news out there comes from organizations like this. And I just showing you here that they're talking about CO2 emissions bumping back up in 22 after the pandemic. The extreme heat and floods were worse in 22 than they have been. The tipping points are starting to be identified for certain aspects of society. There's a 93% chance that at least 1 year between 22 and 26 will be the hottest on record. I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement. And the last time I saw anything like this, they were spot on. They really got it right. And so I just think that we should really take heed at some of the things that come out of organizations like this. This right here comes from Berkeley Earth. I think it's a very good organization that is largely free of government influence. And so a lot of people wanted to make sure that there was really good data coming from a non-governmental source. But this right here is our temperature record over land, over the entire globe from 1850 to 2022. And I think you can probably see if you start back in about 1980, from there to now, that's almost linear. You can take out the little blips going year to year, but the actual trend is almost linear. And that'll be really important when we come back and look at some future things here in just a minute. This right here is also put out by NOAA, and it talks about the billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. I remember when these first came out, there used to be, 4 or 5 on the map every year. And now we have 20, 30, 40 of them every year. 2022 was the third highest at a cost of $165 billion. And it's only third because 2021 and 2019 were actually higher. I mean, it's just amazing. US Climate Extremes Index. I don't want to get into a lot of great deal on this other than the climate science community has come up with ways of taking multiple measures and being able to put it in a framework to understand how extremes are occurring. And so this is showing some things for 2021 at the continental United States level, and then over time. A couple of just things to mention about it. Maximum temperatures, minimum temperatures, and one-day precipitation totals have all gone up much above average in the past 15 to 20 years everywhere in the United States. Record warm extremes are happening 15 to 25 times that of record cold extremes. And everybody here has flipped a coin, right? If we had a stable climate, it would be 50-50. So just think about that a little bit. So granted, we can have a cold event this winter, but they're happening so much less than what we have the warm events happening most of the rest of the time. So I just wanted everybody to understand that we are not in a stable climate. Some observed trends, and again, this just gets to the data geek in me. The idea, we did this project looking at some very big places throughout the world growing wine grapes, and you can see where the red dots are here, the 23 different regions, and just to show some trends and data, just to show that it's not perfectly linear. There's some vintage variation from year to year across here, but you can go to Southern England, which, by the way, if you've never been and tried some of their wines, they are top notch right now, just top notch. So if you find English sparkling in the store, buy it. Burgundy, Napa, and Perth in Western Australia. All of these places warm significantly. Decadal rates are about 0.22 degrees Fahrenheit on average. And here's something important. Period of record averages over this time period are 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Do you remember what Pinot Noir's niche was? 4. So just think about that. If you're a Pinot Noir growing region like Burgundy back in 1900, you warm by 2.5 degrees, potentially putting you out at that edge where Pinot Noir is known to be suitable. Okay, that's a really big take home from this. I'll talk about Oregon just real quick, go through some different things. Again, very much a set of data for someone like myself. But this is for 14 locations around Oregon that are all in grape growing regions to kind of sum it up for the state level. But just put it in perspective. Doesn't matter if you're talking about heat accumulation, growing degree days, average temperatures, maximum temperatures, or minimum temperatures. They've all warmed from that 1948 to the 2016 data that I had here. We can look at cold events. Cold events have changed, but they have not gone away. That's important. We've had fewer cold events. We've had changes in frost timing or freeze timing, even both, but cold events still occur. They just occur with a different frequency and timing. And if we're not used to them, we're not going to be used to them. That's kind of a big issue. Precipitation is highly variable, especially during the winter, but there are some trends in some locations. During the ripening period, we've fortunately gotten drier in most of Oregon. During the bloom period, we've unfortunately gotten wetter in many places. So there's a kind of a plus and minus there. Again, another trend, this is just Medford data from 1928 to 2022, just to give you the numbers on this, because I know if you don't think in growing degree day numbers, you might not, they may not make sense, but just from an average standpoint, from 1928 to 1990, pardon me, we averaged 2722. From 1991 to 2022, we averaged 3210. This is a completely different ripening envelope for wine grapes in our region. Completely different ripening envelope. Year-to-year variation is about 12% of average. Last 38 years, or last 30 years, are 18% more than the previous 60. And the trend is 3 times since 1980 what it used to be. So we've ramped up, you know, it gets back to that kind of 1980 onward kind of framework. You guys all know what this is, students?
I used to.
It's just a simple bell-shaped curve. So I took all of the data that we were just talking about, and in this case, it's just growing season temperatures, but the same kind of thing for the amount of years here in this data set. And each standard deviation is about 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you look at that data, 1990, 1999, 2010, and 2011 are the only years during that entire time period that have been below the mean of late. Check that out, just have been below the mean. And 2010 was the last kind of real below the mean kind of a year we had. 15 of the last 20 years have all been up here. And then 2014 stands out as being close to 3 standard deviations above normal. Okay, so that's just putting it into kind of a distribution perspective. And we'll come back and we'll talk about California with this here in just a minute too. Rainfall, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this other than just knowing this for a fact. Medford's annual precipitation from 1912 to 2022, we average about 18.5 inches of rainfall here in this region. Ashland is just a hair more, but not much. Okay, but you can see kind of the black line there. That's the decadal moving average that we see periods where it's a little drier, a little wetter, and a little drier. Year-to-year variation is almost 5 inches, though. Think about that. A year of 14 inches is a pretty dry year here, and you're likely not going to have any water for agriculture whatsoever. But a wet year, you know, it's like this year could be very different. The range here, this is interesting. The range was 22 inches. The range is bigger than the mean, which is amazing when you think about statistics. So in 1996, we had 31.4 inches in Medford, while in 2013, we had 9 inches. That's just an amazingly different environment to work in. So let's go to the future. Again, going back to Berkeley Earth, over the short term, and I said this earlier on in my conclusions, that persistence in the climate system points to continued warming. The climate system doesn't flip automatically unless there's some other kind of major perturbation to the system, meaning a bunch of volcanic eruptions or an asteroid impact or solar changes or something like that. So persistence in the climate system tells us we're headed warmer. This little green area up here, the likely range, and Berkeley Earth has done this for quite a few years, and they really have been spot on. They take in known influences, things like El Nino, La Nina, Arctic amplification, and other things, and they put a window in there. The likely range for this next coming year is, as you see there, I believe that even with this cold spring, it'll actually end up being in the top side of that because La Nina's gone away and El Nino is coming in, and it's only going to warm up the hemisphere. So I'm pretty sure that we're going to be in the top end of that green bar there. Emissions have slowed, but not enough. And I think that there's so many things that can be talked about in there. We just as a society, we're just not doing enough to slow our emissions. Over the long term, continued warming is likely. You guys have heard about the UN's 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit number that they talk about quite a bit. They think that a lot of tipping points are going to happen right about that time, that some aspects of our ecosystem at the global scale to regional scale will fail at that point in time. I don't know what that looks like, but that's what we're pointing to. But you can see if you just take that line from 1980 and go linear out, it says we'll get to that 1.5 Celsius by 2033. That's not far away. Not far away at all. And then 2 degrees Celsius by 2059. Oh, this is just a little fun project here. I really like to show this because this was cutting edge stuff. And I did it right here at SIU. I did it with some friends in Italy. We thought about, if we know enough about these historic wine regions and where they are and what they're doing, could we use a model to kind of say, okay, train it up to understand what these regions were like climatically and landscape wise. And then we could say, okay, well, what happens in the future if we move over time? So we focused on these 18 different wine regions, and some of them you're probably familiar with in terms of names up there. And so what we did is we fast forwarded the climate to the middle of this century and saying, okay, well, what happens to these wine regions over time? And what you're going to see here is you're going to see there's going to be some outlines on the historic boundaries, but you're going to see scattered color. That's where these wine regions will scatter in terms of their suitability. This was done with a model called random forest, and it really is pretty amazing in terms of what it actually shows. Look up at Champagne. Notice that the Champagne region, the suitability scatters to the area around it. And what that means is that Champagne wine grape growers will likely have to think about planting outside their approved boundaries, which means that it's a governmental issue. And somebody's got to approve that before it happens. You can go down to a place like in Portugal there, the Ribatejo. Look what happens to their region. It moves toward the coast almost exclusively. You can go to some regions, like over to Chianti. A whole area of Chianti might be found north up in the Veneto region. And again, just a very simple kind of way in which you can look at what we know today and say, okay, let's move into the future and see what happens to it. And this is the whole geographic kind of movement of places that we think might happen. Okay, now I told you I was going to get to California, just so I can show you some other regions here too. A similar kind of thing. This is what California was operating in from a growing season temperature framework in 1981 to 2010. They were 1 standard deviation pretty much above their long-term average. By 2020 to 2040, the midpoint of that 20-year period, they're supposed to be just slightly below 2 standard deviations above average. 2040 to 2060, almost 3 standard deviations above average. So if you put that in perspective, on average, will be like the warmest of years in the historic period. But here's the something that I think is worrisome. We've already been there. And so have we accelerated our warming so much that we're not quite understanding what those potential changes might be? Or are we just in a highly variable system that has changed real rapidly and may back down a little bit? We don't know. But this is pretty concerning. And then let's take that and go to a wine region. And again, I'm just trying to share the wealth talking about different places. Let's talk about the Willamette Valley. This green box here, the vertical green box, is what I call the climatic envelope for the Willamette Valley. So if you could go up there and you could take the entire boundary, the region, and average up its climate, that's the climatic envelope that they have to operate in. And so if you take that from a historic perspective of what they've been ripening there, Pinot Noir, Riesling, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Müller Thurgau, and let's just do a what if with 2 degrees of warming. 2 degrees of warming shifts that whole entire window up into more intermediate climate category. 4 degrees of warming puts only the coolest places in the Willamette Valley's envelope still able to grow Pinot Noir the way we know today. And then if you go to 6 degrees, it completely changes. 6 degrees warming in the Western United States and for the Willamette Valley means that their climate would be more like Bordeaux than it would be like the Willamette Valley. And the big take on with this is that warming in that range is projected by the middle of the century for the region. Doesn't mean that some other things might not happen, but it's projected there. So then that takes us right back here. Remember when we talked about all this? Let's go back through this again. Remember what I said about the warming in the future is highly likely? Why is that? The climate system has some persistence in it. It will not change dramatically without something we just don't see on geologic timescales. Okay, so warming of the future is highly likely. Economics and greed influencing very slow responses. There's so many things we could talk about that, but the economics of big energy and oil, and even the economics behind, alternative energies, I think is really, something's not right. When only the rich can afford to have, electric cars and solar panels, that needs to be for everybody. And we're just not there. Somebody's out there wanting to make a buck, and they're going to continue doing it until they get what they want out of it. It's just really an unfortunate system. And I probably should shut up. Agriculture is both part of the problem, part of the solution. I think agriculture has really done a very good job of looking at itself in many industries. Maybe not so much in the largest broadacre crop systems, but in most specialty crops, whether it be coffee or cacao or avocados or whatever, people are really looking at trying to better understand how we can be better stewards of the ecosystems we grow in. At the same time, try to better understand, can we produce solutions that can help other industries do the same thing? So there's a lot of things going on, I think, that really has taken that to a level. And viticulture and wine production has really been at the forefront of this. I think mostly because of the connection between wine and society and history and geography and food and other things as well. Mitigation is necessary. When I say that, mitigation is really doing things that don't continue to make the problem worse. And there's a lot of activities that can be done kind of in that framework. Some of them are more costly than others. Again, there's kind of some components of the economics in there, but the adaptive components are really big, really big. I mean, if any of you have been growing, John, I know you've lived in the same place for a long time. You guys have always had great gardens in the back, right? You probably don't grow things exactly the same way that you did when you first started doing them, because it probably wouldn't work. So we really have to think about how we do stuff in that kind of lens, looking at what do we do today that allows us to adapt to the conditions that we're seeing, because we can't do enough mitigation to solve the problem. So we're going to have to do adaptation to some degree. Crop diversity, I think we should all be drinking Rabagato, Zinamavro, seriously, things that you would never pronounce. But I think that they have better opportunities to grow and be effective in terms of its productivity and quality in warmer and drier environments. Very important. But those things are not out there we're just not playing with them enough. Resiliency is definitely, now that I run the family's business, it's hard. I mean, I can build a very resilient system to the averages that we experience, the average conditions. But last year we had our first frost in 27 years. Go figure. I probably will not have another frost for 27 years, or I could have one next week. That's hard to deal with. But you have to build a system that's resilient to manage that kind of framework. And then lastly, there's no one thing, and please, if you guys, as you guys grow up, just think about it. It's not one thing that's going to solve the issue. It's a large portfolio of kind of what we do in the world around us that's really important. So with that, I think I've probably, it's pretty close to about the right time. So now that I'm outside of academia, I moved all of my material to my website called climateofwine.com. Of course, that's a great name. And so virtually everything I've done is posted on there if you're interested. Plus, I still write some weather and climate reports for the Western United States. If you're interested, you can sign up for them. But other than that, I'm up in Roseburg. My wife and I are there all the time. Come visit. It's a beautiful place. And I appreciate it very much. Thank you. All right.
Questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you trying any of the varietals that you mentioned at Abacela yet, or?
So to put that into perspective, have you ever been to Abacela?
Yes.
Okay. So when my dad first planted, we talked long and hard about this, and he had a keen interest on Spanish and Portuguese varieties, but he knew that that wasn't the only kind of set of varieties he wanted to or could grow. We planted originally 23 varieties there. And it was some of it's trial and error. And we pulled out 7 or 8 of them. We've added back 3 or 4 more. We pulled out 3 or 4 more. And it's all about what works. And we look at it from what works in the current framework, but also kind of what we anticipate the future to be. So right now we have 17 different varieties, and most of them were the first ever in the entire state of Oregon or Pacific Northwest to be planted. And we did those not because we wanted to be first, we did it because that's what the climate allowed us to do. And there are varieties that have some plasticity a little bit to the climate, we think. So, I mean, but we might learn something else maybe even better in the future. Yes, sir.
Is there also work to look at a specific grape variety, say Cabernet, and try to see how that might be genetically modified by Howard to allow it to be more heat tolerant?
Sure. So just a little bit about wine grapes in general. Wine grapes are not carried around the world and planted everywhere by seed. If you go collect seeds from somewhere and you plant it, you're likely going to get a good vine, but it won't produce very much fruit at all. It comes from propagative cuttings. So you take a cutting and you plant that. And so as you move wine grapes around, basically what you're doing is you're trying to find the best cuttings to be able to do that. So what grape growers and both in industry and academia have done over the years, it's all been about breeding, taking the system and being able to breed some characteristic of one into another. And so you could look at that as a modified genetic kind of framework behind things, but it's not transgenic, taking something from somewhere else and inserting it in. The work that's going on today, looking at the genetic side of it, is trying to use tools like CRISPR to be able to say, can we take not just Cabernet, but some other varieties too, that are growing in the Negev desert of Israel, and say, what allows them to do that? What is the temperature, drought, conditioning genes that allow them to do that? And can we then breed that into Cabernet or some other variety? That's kind of the real idea.
How do you breed that in? Is it are you talking about grafting or?
No, it's mostly taking the flowering parts and again, you need to get real close to a grapevine when it's flowering. It's not very pretty, but it's really cool. The actual flowering component has a cap that sits on it. And that cap slowly dries when the pistils and stamens start pushing it upward. So it does this. And only after they're self-fertilized does the cap fall off. But so what they're doing, what grapevine breeders do is they take 2 plants in isolated environments and they go in there underneath the cap and they take material from it and take it from one plant to another plant. And they do crossbreeding like that across multiple different varieties and trying to find out what is the exact match that works within that framework. You know, there are some varieties that are even on my list there. Your Gewürztraminer and Müller-Thurgau were actually bred. They were bred between 2 other varieties. And we know that in the Pinot Noir, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris family, those are all genetic cousins of some sort that they interspecies. So. Yeah. Jim.
I'm curious just how many other vineyards you're aware of or hearing about that are experimenting with some of those other varietals and you know, where are they experimenting with those? What are these regions that may emerge as important?
In the European sector, the most important regions for a really rich genetic material is Greece, southern Italy, and southern Portugal. The hottest ones, places where they have hundreds of varieties that we don't know nothing about. And so we're seeing a lot of that work being done. The Australians have done some really interesting work. They have collaborated with the governments of Cyprus and Crete, and gone to those areas where there's some varieties that are not grown anywhere else. And they now have research projects in Australia that are looking at those varieties and how they perform there. Yeah. So there's a lot of that happening. Here in the US, everybody is just so in tune to that top, collection of 5, 6, 7 varieties. And I get it. It's an economic issue, but that's not going to save anything in the future. All that's doing is saving a short-term kind of profitability issue. And I was at a conference not long ago, and we were talking about the cart and the horse kind of framework. What came first? Was it the consumer saying, I'm going to buy Gallo's jug wine, Merlot, because I can now pronounce it instead of Merlot, it's Merlot. Wow, and I'm cool now. So no, but there's some really interesting things with that. There's a couple of people at Fresno State that are doing a sociological look at kind of how the industry's evolved in terms of those kind of recognitions of names. And the other piece of it is as place names in Europe. We've grown up here in the United States to understand certain things to be Rioja, when in reality it's Tempranillo. Rioja is just a town or a region. So, long story. Yes, sir.
As industry pursues other beverages, have you considered grappa?
Yeah.
Why do I explain what grappa is?
Well, yeah. So I just still don't get why Americans don't. Well, I guess I do. It's high alcohol. Basically, what grappa is, you take anything that's left over in the production stream and you distill it, not quite to clear alcohol kind of frameworks, but you distill it. And in Europe, you can go to any grandpa's garage and get the best grappa. He's taken it from the mark of the grapes that he's just produced that year, and he's mixed it in with some coffee or some other herbs. And it's great, but it's like 60% alcohol, 45, something like that. And we just don't go there. We take everything that's the byproduct, and we've been so in tune to throwing it away.
Yeah.
Or maybe putting it into a compost, and that's about it. And I do think we need to do more of it. It just means that we'd have higher alcohol issues.
I think in Italy, it's illegal for them to throw away the waste. They actually have to give it to a grappa distiller.
One of the best grappas I ever had, and Liz, I brought some home. You probably remember this. I was in Spain in an area called Ribera Sacra, and I went to this guy's place and he had like 6 grappas. And he was making grappa with Madrono, which is their version of Madrone. Yeah. It's more of a bush there than it is here, but it still has a red berry. And what they were doing is he was making Madrono grappa, and it was wonderful, wonderful. I'd love to have some more. So we have to go back. Yes, sir.
What are the economic trade-offs between always buying brand new wine bottles versus figuring out how to recycle?
Yeah, I think we need to get somewhere on this pretty quickly. I remember as a kid, I was born in Western Kentucky, and I used to go, when my parents moved away, I'd go back and visit my grandparents a lot, and we'd go into the old country stores, and you'd buy a soda in one of those cases, and you go in there and you drink it and you leave the bottle next to it. And that's what I grew up remembering. And then we're in this place now where nothing like that happens. Nothing. There are a few wineries that are trying to look at recycling bottles. The problem is you have to have a complete ecosystem around you to be able to deal with that, because if you're shipping bottles off somewhere, then there's going to be a certain amount of your product going somewhere else that you'll never get back. But if there's enough consumption in the area, then you have to be able to find a place that will recycle that, sanitize it, and get it back to you in a situation in which it can be reused in your bottling line. Sometimes they can.
You have to standardize the bottles that are being.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Right now, the biggest bottling issue is around weight, going from 600 or 700 grams of weight down to 400 or so. And, you know, I think that will probably be fine. It's just, there's this perception issue that and there's lots of research out there that basically says, you pick up a heavy bottle, you think it's expensive and good. It's just the way it is. The other one is the screw caps versus corks. If you do that, it sounds more expensive. That's just what the public knows. A screw cap just doesn't do the same thing. So it'll take our generation to get out of the way and let these guys figure out, what do you want? You want it, you want it in a PET container or an aluminum can? You want it with a screw cap always? Yeah, mason jar, there you go. I mean, there's, yeah. A lot of those kind of issues are out there. Okay. Well, okay, favorite wines? Anybody have anything other than the top 10?
Nebbiolo.
Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo doesn't do very well here. Everybody I know that's put it in, except maybe a couple, have taken it out. And I'm not sure why, other than the root of the word. Where's that? The root of the word in Italian is fog. And it's very interesting that that area of Piedmont has more fog than in almost any grape growing region in the world. So is there something about really, really warm days when it warms up versus fog almost every morning? I don't know.
I've enjoyed some Southern Oregon Viogniers.
Viognier, lovely. Sue, that's what we had last night. Yeah, it was very good. No, and Viognier is a lovely grape, but again, the average American probably cannot pronounce it, so therefore we'll have a harder time buying it. Or the consumer, or the producer will have a harder time committing so much quantity to the purchaser.
Isn't that kind of a marketing issue? I mean, rename it.
Yeah.
It is.
Call it
It is.
Like how they do it.
Oregon Star.
Yeah. So there are some, the TTB regulates some of that. So we have varietal names that can be used. And if you start naming things something very different, then you've got to go through the TTB to get it approved.
You do a nice Albarino.
Yeah, there you go. It's a good variety. Yeah.
Monica,
Monica? Yeah.
you know Monica?
Yeah. Mhm. But there are so many things like that. There are Petite Manzang, a lovely variety, Madeleine Angevin, Rabagato, Incruzada, some varieties that we just, nobody has. So we don't have a chance to even try them to really get on the bandwagon at all. So it's really unfortunate because those are fun. Those are fun things to do and experience. Anyway, I could stand up here and talk. And I didn't bring any wine. Ed, you didn't ask me to. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I thank everybody for coming. Appreciate it.